Insurtech Story Podcast, the platform to spread knowledge on insurance innovation, digital disruptions, and entrepreneurship. Our website, insurtechstory.com, and we are available on Spotify, Apple, and Google. And also, we have just got introduced to Amazon Music and Audible, so feel free to listen in to our podcast in these platforms as well. Today, we will discuss on the topic how spatial data is impacting the insurance industry. And for now, I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Rosalie van der Maas, who is the co-founder and CEO of Ellipsis Drive, and who is going to throw some light on this very interesting topic of spatial data in the insurance industry. So, Rosalie, a warm welcome to the show.
Thank you. Much appreciated and happy to be here today. I'm excited to get this topic of discussion started. As mentioned, my name is Rosalie van der Maas. I'm indeed one of the co-founders and CEO here at Ellipsis Drive. And in a nutshell, Ellipsis Drive is a spatial data management and integration solution. And spatial data management and integration is a challenge across a lot of industries. But recently, the insurance industry, especially P&C and catastrophe insurance, are groups that are becoming increasingly dependent on spatial data. So the topic of proper spatial data management and allowing that to transform the industry is becoming top of mind. So excited to be here.
Oh, fantastic. Would you like to tell us, our audiences, a bit about your background? What made you choose this segment of insurance? What interests you there?
Yeah, so it's interesting because our company actually came mostly from the Earth observation industry in the early days, and this was well over 5 years ago. We started out as a spatial data analytics company, and there are thousands of those across the globe, and rightfully so, because there's a lot to analyze and there's a lot to learn. But we noticed that spatial data management, as sort of it's something on the critical path to success when you do spatial data analytics, was severely lacking within most of the geospatial industry. So we started to build out the product that we call Ellipsis Drive to basically make spatial data ingestion, management, and integration easy for everyone who creates spatial data products, but also those who consume it. Because we started out in the Earth observation industry, we are very well aware of all the data sets, both raw and ready-to-use analytics are being produced that help predict risk. And related to this industry, you find property and casualty insurance to be a very interesting overlapping market. So basically, from one market into the other, we found that spatial data is of increased interest, and challenges around spatial data management still need to get solved. So that's why we're here, and that's why we're also active within the insurance industry recently.
I'm very curious to understand, to create such platforms. So what goes behind the screen with respect to AI and kind of technologies that is being used? Is there any sort of of course, when you're using spatial data and geographical navigation and so on and so forth. So is there any sort of thing that goes above in the outer space?
Yeah, so the most important thing that Ellipsis Drive does, sort of under the hood, is making sure that all spatial data that is out there, and that is a lot, as in spatial data is very broad. It can be like geocoded addresses, it can be building information that's attached to a certain location, it can be weather data, earthquake data, extreme events data. It's very, very broad. So one of the most challenging things is to make all of that a unified source to perform analytics on. Like any data scientist or machine learning expert or AI expert will tell you that most of their time is spent on wrangling data into such a shape that they're actually able to run their models and run their queries. Yeah. And these are very stringent, this is a very stringent starting out point. And spatial data is behaving in a special snowflake in all the worst ways, as in it takes a lot of time to wrangle that into a unified shape that actually allows you to perform analysis. So what Ellipsis Drive does under the hood is basically allow you, the user, to dump in any type of spatial data sets, whether that's raster data, or satellite data with multispectral bands, radar data, or simple point locations. they're all unified into something that becomes like easily queryable and renderable into downstream workflows and applications. And it seems so simple, but it's really the current main blocker for more successful and more advanced use of spatial data within insurance modeling. So getting those basics down are extremely important and are a major blocker for actuarials, for modelers, and for data scientists within this field.
Right. Yeah. So, moving on to our discussion points. Of course, in the recent years, the use of spatial data has become, increasingly important for insurance companies,
Mm-hmm.
and which includes geographical information about physical locations that's being used to assess risk in particular, and of course, analyze patterns, make more informed decisions, and so on and so forth. So, what exactly is spatial data, and how is it being used in the insurance sector?
Yes. So to start with the basics, like spatial data is any data that has a location attached to it, which again can be very broad. Like for example, if you send out a tweet and you have the geotag turned on, your tweet that you just posted is also technically spatial data because it has content and it has a location, and that location is presumably relevant to that content. At the same time, like telematics data from, for example, floating cars, in which you get information about the speed, the fuel use, all of that is spatial information too. In the same way that, for example, an Earth observation satellite imagery is also spatial information. It's a picture from space, and each pixel corresponds with a certain location on Earth. You can imagine that within the insurance industry, especially property and casualty insurance, as well as car insurance, location is incredibly important because
Right.
your location and a number of qualities of your asset basically build your risk profile. So when we're talking about insurance specifically, spatial data is used in underwriting, in risk modeling, and in the claims processes. And that has happened for centuries already. But in very recent times, this has become more advanced, and it has the opportunity to become even, much more advanced than we're currently looking at.
So, is there anything that can be described or rather meant for the insurers, but it will be different for the policyholders to know what spatial data exactly can benefit?
Yeah, so I mean, in some ways, little changes, and in other ways, a lot changes. Because if you let your house get insured back in 1910, for example, an insurance company would still ideally like to know where your house would be at. Which was at that point in time a relatively difficult question to ask, but it was still something that would be a common practice. Whereas in this century, your insurer will definitely want to know what the geocode of your address is. So basically, what your coordinates are. But beyond that point, they're interested in a myriad of other things, like what is the crime rate like in your neighborhood? What are the profiles looking like in terms of flood, cold waves, winter storms, heat waves, fire occurrences? Like these are all pieces of intelligence that are pretty new to the insurance industry, and that are really building a rich profile of anyone who can get insured. So the result is that you can have more accurate pricing for the properties you're insuring. The result is also that we can actually close the insurance gap, because a lot of properties in the past and still today can't receive commercial insurance because the insurance companies presume a risk that isn't there. So even though the biggest fear of a lot of insurance companies is to actually assume too much risk, there is a large market out there that is just up for grabs, that is at a decent risk, but insurance carriers just can't get enough information to build the confidence that they can safely and responsibly provide insurance there. So insurance companies don't all of a sudden start to do something incredibly different, but they are
Right.
equipped to do what they do a lot better and more accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how does spatial data impact risk assessment and, of course, the pricing of insurance policies? Because these two elements are the most critical, you know, for both the insurers as well as the policy buyers. So, where do you see
Mhm.
this making difference in assessing risk and pricing?
So the main difference is basically already created where the risk model is launched, because when you start your underwriting process, you're already applying the risk model that your company is using at the time. But this risk model is consistent of like four steps or components, and one of them, or at least when we're talking about like risk of catastrophes,
Right.
one of them is sort of determining the stochastic event that we're looking at. So getting information on, for example, earthquakes and hurricanes. The second one is to understand how this hazard translates to a certain spatial footprint. So the where of the question. Then thirdly, they need to calculate what the damage can be according to the vulnerability of both an asset as well as the exact characteristics of potential events. And that's also when information of like what's the reoccurrence of this event looking like what will happen once every 5 years, what will happen once every 10 years, what will happen once every 100 years, etc., etc. And
Right.
then ultimately this leads to a quantification of potential financial loss, and a more specification of financial models. So at the end of the day, what you get is a much more accurate pricing point. So basically, those who are under actual risk will see that in their policy, and those who are unfairly deemed at high risk will find that policies are much more affordable to them. At the end of the day, though, it's the increased influx of spatial data into insurance will simply result into more accurate decision making, and more accurate policy building, because you're just all of a sudden leveraging a data source that has been ignored for most of the insurance history. It's just something of the last decade or so.
Right. Yep. It's quite interesting, how insurers are actually trying out various data sources, the way they can use analytics to make better decisions, and how, in particular, especially, when we say spatial data, geocoding, and so on and so forth. So it's become so much important for the insurers to actually use such mechanisms to assess the risks accurately. That helps both the policy buyers as well as the insurers, not just to save costs, but also to give better services with respect to pricing, and as well as risk modeling, and how the claims were, and it's calculated
Indeed, like
henceforth.
especially like for because at the start of the process you care
Yeah.
most about your policy price, but in the end, during the claims process, which can be very lengthy
Yep.
for both regular insurance as well as insurance that just focuses on like the scale of the event. That's a very frustrating process for like everybody involved, and effective use of spatial data like aerial imagery and the spatial models that vendors are exposing to insurance carriers can really smooth down this process and shorten it a lot, and
Right.
basically just make sure that you get your reimbursement ASAP, instead of needing to wait a very long time when you're already hit with a catastrophe.
Yep. Yep. True. So now moving on to the last discussion for the day, where do you see, or rather, what are the current trends in the use of spatial data in insurance, and what can we expect out of this in the future? What's your take on this?
Yes. So we're definitely seeing that the use, or more like the appetite of use, is growing amongst like first tier insurance carriers and reinsurance carriers. We definitely see that reinsurers are maybe even more data hungry than insurance carriers are.
Right.
And we see this appetite grow. However, at the same time, we see that like the teams that are being paid internally to manually process, manage, and integrate spatial data are growing and bulky. We also see that current data management systems require like increasing levels of human and technical resources to meet scaling demands for spatial risk data. So we're basically seeing that with the increased appetite for spatial data, we also see a growing problem for insurance and reinsurance carriers in ingesting and managing that data. and basically being able to scale up their infrastructures to the degree that is necessary to actually properly leverage this resource. And this is a problem. This is something that's holding the industry back right now. So what we'll see change in the future is that, first and foremost, that fundamental step needs to be taken of updating an IT infrastructure that is of the previous century. And then if that's done, we'll find ourselves with more interoperable and more unified access to all sorts of spatial data analytics products, either from that are generated inside of insurance carriers or that are being bought from vendors. And that we'll find that the industry will be able to make use of much more advanced analytics and will be able to properly transpose data from contracts along with key metrics on risk, and also understand nonlinear risk in that sense. So yeah, that's what I believe we'll be seeing in the short term, because the first step has been taken. Like there's a keen interest in using spatial data, and corporates understand the value in this. Now they've dipped a toe in, and they realize that with this influx of new information, their IT infrastructure is due for an update. So the next step will be getting that update in place. And then I believe we'll reap the true benefits that spatial data can bring to this industry.
Yep.
And I do think that can be like within a couple of years down the road. That shouldn't be like far off future. It should definitely be around the corner for us.
So do you see any specific sub-segments of the insurance industry, getting benefited the most out of spatial data? For example, motor insurance provider or marine insurers.
Yes. So properties and assets, cars, and indeed marine and aviation insurance are definitely the ones that stand to benefit the most. That also lean on spatial data the most already. And that have the most intensive investment on risk modeling that is related to climate risk. And climate risk is, of course, very interesting. Like most insurance carriers are known for basing their
I think that's one of the
predictions.
most important one in today's date, how catastrophic risk can be mitigated.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's interesting because it's something that we can't just learn from the past from. Like we need to learn how to predict, and for predicting we need more advanced analytics, because simply projecting whatever we've recorded in the past into the future doesn't work anymore because we live in a changing environment. So that's also why I think that within this niche of the insurance industry, relying on modern spatial data solutions is absolutely key.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much, Rosalie. It was a fantastic discussion, and thank you for sharing your thoughts today. A true delight to have you as a guest.
Thank you so much. I was happy to be here.
And last, to wrap this up, thank you for listening, and see you at our next episode. Take care and stay safe. Goodbye for now.